Which job did you quit fastest? Dunkin' Donuts. A customer threw their donuts and hot coffee at me. I dodged. My manager apologized to them and gave them a discount. Couldn't leave that job fast enough. Story 2. I worked for 2 hours at a Burger King before I quit. I was only scheduled 11 hours of work after being promised at least 25, and they cut me halfway through my first shift because it was slow. Story 3. I applied to several jobs and missed out on my dream job, so took a grunt work job. Dream job called back to offer me a position, so I quit the grunt work job after 2 days. Felt bad, but I was also thrilled at the new position. Story 4. I was 19 in college, responded to an ad, make $1,800 per week. Fun and exciting, no experience required, we will train. Went to 3 separate interviews in a fancy office. Third interview, they told me to wear a suit. They told me how much they liked me, and not many people make it to the third interview. Nailed the interview and got the job. Must wear a suit. I thought this was an important job. Day 1, we meet in a warehouse. Everyone dressed in business attire. Suddenly, they start shouting and chanting. It's their morning hype routine. They're now practicing their sales pitches. I still don't know what my job is at this point. We break into groups of 5 with one team leader. We're going to meet at a different location, but we're told to leave our cars here. We can ride with our team leader. They drove us 40 miles away to a shopping center. I still don't know what the is going on. We start walking and go right into a barber shop. The team leader busts out some Mountain Mike's pizza coupons and starts making his pitch. Do you like pizza? Blah, blah, blah. $20 to buy this coupon book. In it contains 20 free pizzas. Buy 1 pizza, get 1 free. It still doesn't click. Why is our team leader trying to sell a Mountain Mike's coupon book to this barbershop owner? We continue to the next shop. Again, he repeats his pitch. The 4 of us new guys follow along until he finishes the entire strip. He sold 1 coupon. We go back to his car where he pops the trunk and hands us 5 coupons each. He brings out a map of the city and tells us which blocks we are going to go through and to knock on doors and try to sell these coupons. It finally hit me. We're door-to-door salesmen, and these coupons are our product. 0 pay. Commission only. We get to keep $7 per coupon sold. We're 40 miles away from my car, so I can't leave. I might as well try my luck and knocked on doors for 10 hours. I'm exhausted and managed to sell 1 coupon, earning $7 for the day. No call, no show for me. I was gone the next day and didn't answer their calls. Story 5. I was a line cook for a long time, and the beauty of that is you're not married to any one restaurant. At the time I was single, not getting benefits, the pay is about the same and everybody was hiring, so your bullcrap tolerance was allowed to be quite low. I worked at one place where the head chef was just a junk. I had worked 10 days in a row because of a call-outs and finally had a Saturday off. Phone rang early in the morning and I picked it up. That was my mistake. Back before cell phones were the norm, you can just say, "You tried calling? Oh, I was out all day, sorry." And nobody would doubt you. Anyway, I answer, somebody's grandmother died for the 4th time, so he needed me. I was livid, but money is money and went in. No, thanks for helping me out. Just like it was expected, and he started barking orders at me while he sat out in the dining room drinking coffee with the servers. No, if you're claiming to be short-handed, you don't get to do that stuff. I didn't come in to make your day easier. Took off my apron, said see you later, and that was that. Got a job at another restaurant a couple days later. Story 6. Once spent a day in a very exclusive school's IT department while I was doing some agency work. I had a confirmed job offer, but it didn't start for a month, so I was just doing a day here, a day there for places. I spent a day at that school, and it consisted mostly of walking. Massive place. Multiple IT departments, dozens of technicians, thousands of users, dozens of buildings, etc. After about an hour of walking around following one guy, a ticket came in on his screen to change one small cable. I offer to go do it, or I can tail him while he shows me where to go. Nope. He just leaves it. Does nothing. Another ticket. Just sits at his desk chatting. Another. A teacher bursts into the room severely pissed off because his laptop that's been in for repair so many times is still faulty. I normally wouldn't, but seeing the laptop, I sympathized with him. He had clearly had a crap show with the people who were dealing with that repair, just from one look. The whole room does nothing. One guy takes it off him, tosses it on a repair pile. When he's gone, I ask if I can take a look. Nope. They intend to just give him the exact same laptop back later and tell him they'd had a look. Literally. They just said it out loud. Went to a different department. Mainly, I think, because they just didn't want me there asking questions. That one had a room full of pristine desks, no hardware in sight, everything triple monitors and bluster. Nobody actually doing anything. Yes, guys. I work in IT and in schools, so I can spot the programs you have open from across the room with only a glance, and you're just skiving. All of you. Glad hand a couple of bosses of that department. Again, nothing much happening, nothing even visibly happening after, when it's just me talking to one guy and the others can return to work. We go to lunch. After lunch, I tail the same guy again. We're walking about 30 minutes up the road to another site where they need some new PCs put in. Finally, some action. Nope, we get there. The furniture is already in the empty building, a few network cables in a bag. The PCs are still in their Dell boxes, just sitting on the desk. They come boxed and pre-imaged, so we aren't even imaging them on site. We pull them out, connect them. One of the desks is longer than the rest, and the PC sitting on it wouldn't quite reach the Ethernet cable that's connected to the wall. It's about 20 centimeters short. I ask for a longer cable. I kid you not, the guy said he wasn't authorized to do that, but it's not going to reach. And you can do nothing? Not without authorization. But there's a working phone, right here. We could just ask, right? Apparently not. The guy leaves me there, walks back to the main site to get authorization for a longer cable. While I'm waiting for the hour it takes him to come back, I poke around. There's a comms room in the new building, wide open. There's a 6-foot high central rack, and maybe it occupies 10% of the space in the room. Literally nothing else in the room. One switch in it. A few connections made to those office Ethernet ports. Sitting at the bottom of the rack, thousands of patch leads. I mean, thousands. All bagged, all different lengths. Far too many for the entire set of buildings, let alone one comms room. The guy eventually comes back, carrying a slightly longer lead in an identical bag to the one in the comms room, leaves it on the desk, walks out. We go back to the main site. I actually genuinely thought it was a test or a piss take. I even asked a couple of the people. No, that's how they operate. A team of dozens doing nothing all day long and spending hours just occupying their time to get a single patch lead, spending inordinate amounts of money on huge flash equipment and giant empty rooms that are holding nothing, to service buildings with maybe a dozen PCs, ignoring the help desk, ducking over the users, doing literally nothing, and most importantly, paying me to do nothing deliberately. They'd obviously given the "we must have more people, we're desperate," and got workers at agency rates to come in. They demonstrate nothing. They do nothing, even with the paid agency staff. Not a single ticket was resolved in 8 hours of being with a group of dozens of IT technicians and managers. I walked past the bursar's office, generally in charge of money, staff, and things like IT, and thought about reporting it to him. But I realized that actually you can't get that far without them all being complicit, top to bottom, everyone. If you haven't already noticed what your staff are pissing about doing, you have far more serious problem. The agency phoned me and asked if I want to do another day. I refuse and tell them why. I realize that the guy phoning from the agency is an old friend who runs the agency and not the guy I originally was talking to there. He says, "Yeah, I know, sorry, it's easy money, but they literally take someone from me almost every day, pay me for their time, and I get the same response from the people I send every time I send someone. I have no idea what they're doing, but they've been doing it to me for years. Some people last a few weeks, especially the layabouts, but the ones with a bit more respect do what you did and refuse. We all get paid either way, but that place is just weird." I never went back. I refused to deal with them, and sometimes in my professional life, school IT manager, I now get, "Oh, we should do what are doing. They have lots of money and know all about IT," and I explain about my day there. There's absolutely no way I will take the professional advice or hire anyone who has ever worked in those departments for more than a day. I check CVs to see if people have worked for that place now. Story 7, an ISP help desk job that I quit after 4 hours. My resume got passed along by another place. I got offered the job, I took it, and was told to show up on Monday at 9. Monday at 9 rolls around. I'm standing outside the ISP, which is closed. Around 9:30, someone finally comes up, unlocks the door, and asks if I'm there to drop off a payment. I explain that I was hired by the general manager. The guy barely says a word, and I just kind of blindly follow him in. I start doing the new hire paperwork and stuff, and he says, "That'll be your desk," and points to one of 2 stations in the office. He then asks me a few scenario questions about users having issues. I go into in-depth troubleshooting mode, and he says, "No, we use these settings. If it doesn't work, it's not our problem." You know what? Fine. I'm already tired of it. He says I have some more paperwork to fill out, and the other tech comes in. She's already kind of snippy with me. She makes a point of saying that the guy I've been dealing with is her dad, who runs the ISP side, and her mom is the manager who runs the business side. She says, "Things in this office stay in this office, and the other way around." Apparently, there's a divorce in progress. I'm whelmed. I notice the last piece of paperwork is a 90 days non-compete clause, meaning if I leave or get fired, I can't work in the computer tech industry, broadly construed, for 3 months. The daughter says, "We all have to sign them. Even I had to sign one." I take it back to the guy, say I'm not signing it, and he doesn't give a crap. The daughter's pissed. By this time, it's like 11, and I start taking some calls, and the customers are all pissed off because there's things that can be done to fix their connection issues in general that go beyond 2 to 3 settings, and every other ISP in the area offers better support. At lunch, I just left and didn't come back. I emailed the manager and told her I was embarrassed to have been there. Story 8, a temp job at Wells Fargo. the worst company in the world. I was third string quality assurance for their mortgage brand. So what that means is I call people and ask them to verify their personal information for the third time in order to confirm the first two people got it right. My day involved a lot of people yelling at me for my job being a pointless waste of time. I agreed. When my manager informed me he'd been doing it for 2 years and did the same thing as me, despite being the manager, I noped out of there real fast. Went back to being a teacher's aide at a special needs school. Story 9. At one point, I was working 4 part-time jobs, and one of them was a large men's clothing store. I was technically a key holder, but they didn't hire anyone beneath me, so I was basically a glorified cashier/clerk. All right, whatever. The assistant manager, though. Oh, she was awful in the worst way. Said she dated an NFL player and had his kids, but didn't know the team he played for when pressed for info. Would ruin my work I did after I closed, and she opened just to criticize me. Lied to the manager that I told her I wanted to do things with her. Denied she ever said that to me. Would take my sales so she could get any bonuses. It took me 2 months before I snapped. On a day I was supposed to work, I drove up in my street clothes, put my keys on the desk, looked her in the eyes and said, "Have fun," before leaving and never returning. Story 10. Famous footwear. I was hired in August 2005, right before back-to-school sales started to happen, and was told I'd be there from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. and no later. Well, my very first day, the store was destroyed by kids. There were hundreds of boxes on the floor, and every aisle was in complete chaos. At 7:55, my manager said that we were going to have to stay until the store is clean, and that sometimes takes hours. Well, I was 16, my dad had dropped me off and was now outside in the lot waiting for me to get off, and I let her know that. She told me to go tell my dad to leave and that I could call back when it was time to go home. I said sure, and then made an excuse to use the restroom in the back. It being August, I only had a few things with me in the locker, so I grabbed those, punched my time card out, and walked out the backroom door. When I got to my dad, the manager was just walking into the back, and I told him what I had done, and he smiled and laughed. Said something about crafty managers abusing underage workers, and she deserved it. And we went home. I did get a few angry voicemails from her, but that was my first and last day working at Famous Footwear Story 11. Probably when I worked for a third party that contracted with AT&T, it felt like I was in a sweatshop. The place used to be a warehouse for what I DK. I was out right after training. Story 12. Amazon delivery driver. Dead tired after trying to complete 71 stops with almost 200 packages, still 5 hours before my 12-hour shift ends. They told me to go help other drivers. Then traffic occurred and I ended up doing a 14-hour shift. But they said they would only pay me for the 12 hours. I hadn't taken a lunch break the whole day and had only gone for a few quick pisses and nasty porta potties along the way. And this is what I got? After that one day, I called in and said, I'm no longer interested. After that, I kept hearing Amazon drivers are getting abused, like how they have to deliver packages ASAP and aren't allowed breaks in between. I even met and talked to a driver in my local, and he said, it's getting worse. More packages and work, but still the same pay. I have never been more grateful for the decision to quit I made that day. Story 13. When I was 17, I made it 3 days, about 12 hours total, at a restaurant that one of my mom's friends had just opened. I already had a day job that I liked, and I had done restaurant work before. It was summertime, so I had the time, and it was for my mom's friend, so duck it, I jumped in for some extra cash. It turns out my mom's friend was a complete crazy, ducking nasty Karen. I'd been working since I was 12, and no employer had ever treated me like that. I left after my shift and never returned or called to say I was quitting. I didn't even pick up my paycheck because it probably would just cover my uniform, which we had to reimburse them for. Minimum wage was $3.35 per hour. Story 14. I stocked grocery shelves at night the summer I graduated from high school. It was a 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. I hated it right away, and my back hurt like hell. The folks I worked with were like no other people I had met, the sort of crazies that only come out at night. It was also weird watching everyone drive to work as I was driving home and trying to fall asleep at 7 a.m. in the morning. I quit in under 2 weeks. Story 15. Toys R Us. I needed a part-time job, and they sent me home early on my first day because they hadn't met the sales goals for the previous day. They told me they didn't make enough to pay me. I asked them if money was that tight. Then why did they post that job and hire me? I quit on the spot. The store isn't even there anymore, but it closed a while before the company itself fell apart. Story 16. I used to drive heavy freight and wanted to try to stay closer to home. Took a delivery job in city. Was okay for about 2 days, but then the boss's son would come at the end of the day and say, hey, can you deliver these for me? And you had to have your truck parked inside the shop at a certain time. I asked him how I was supposed to do that. When the shop was closing, he said, I don't know, just get it done. I said, damn you, and handed him his keys. Do it yourself, I said. Funny thing, the boss held my check because he wanted me to come in and pick it up myself. I told him, you pay me for my delivery time. You got it, man. He mailed it after 2 weeks. Him and his son both are little. Story 17. I worked as a cashier for 3 weeks when I was 18. That was over 20 years ago, and it scarred me so much, I will never work retail again. I saw a side of humanity I never knew existed. Story 18. I'm a physician. Started working for this private institution that had just merged with another one. They had separated clinical records and did not care to merge them. Every consulatory had an old-ass PC where you would access the records from Institution A. These pieces had a firewall, which prevented you from using the internet to access the records from Institution B. Every time you saw a patient, information had to be input into both institutions' records. Also, some prescriptions had to be done in one system, and some had to be done in another for the same patient. So you would say, okay, pain in the ass, but why not just make an exception in the firewall and that's that? Oh no. Their solution was to give you a laptop which did not have a firewall to access the second institution's records. I would be then on a desk with a desktop PC plus a laptop and having to write in two of them. All prescriptions were digital and I had to print them. So if I needed a prescription for substances, I had to use a printer in the consulatory to print it out and give it to the patient. And since some prescriptions had to be done in the other system, I had to unplug the printer from PC1 to PC2 to then print it. Oh, and both institution systems were complete crap and prone to bugs or just plain not responding. It was hell for me and the patient. I pointed out that this whole thing would be avoided for all the staff if they just added an exception to the firewall. They never cared. I was so happy to get the fuck out of there. It was a straight descent into madness. Story 19. Not me, but a buddy of mine got a job blowing insulation into attics of commercial building. It was mid-July in the Midwest, so the attics were like 105 degrees. Buddy shows up and is told he'd be getting paid $14 an hour instead of the $19 that was agreed upon. He didn't come back after lunch on day one. Story 20. I was hired on the spot to be a receptionist for an optometrist. The first day I realized that the two other women I worked with looked very similar to me. Slim, brunette, under 25. The manager was the optometrist's 40-year-old son. He seemed to have fallen into that job and really let the power go to his head. After about a week of overtly sexual comment on my body and the other women's bodies, along with bizarre power tripping, he'd tell me to do something one way, I'd do it, and then he would say that I was wrong and make up a completely new process. It was clear he wanted to undermine me, and having to listen to graphic retellings of his sex life, I'd finally had it. I was young and broke and scared to speak up or leave a job, but then in front of a client, he said I'd probably made a mistake because I was a looker, not a thinker. I said, okay, I'm done. I don't work here. Got up, grabbed my bag, walked out, stormed down the street until I could turn the corner and cry my eyes out with fear, relief, and pure exasperation. Story 21. Two come to mind. One of my first jobs, around 19, was a very vague listing for salesmen. I show up and the interview process is very brief and I get the okay to go ahead. It's door-to-door soliciting. At the start of the day, you get a big box of bullcrap. It's whatever they bought off the docks as overstock. Socks, books, alarm clocks, kids' toys, whatever it is. They set a price and send you out, and you have to sell this crap over the city. You go into businesses, you stop people on the street, you walk into McDonald's, you go into warehouses, you do whatever. At the end of the day, you come back and give them a cut of the cash. I can't remember how much. It was very cult. At the start of the day, you have a big meeting in a horse escort, and older workers give speeches meant to pump you up. After everybody talks, you shout, "Juice!" I can't remember what it stood for. I lasted 1 week before I quit because it was weird. To be fair, in that 1 week I learned a lot and gained a lot of confidence. Later on, I got a job at an EB Games called GameStop in the States. I'm a huge geek and I was super excited to work in a game store. Once I started though, it was a crap show. I got an hour of training and then I was just on the floor. Every drawer and shelf was mislabeled, so I was just expected to dig through everything looking for game. Coworkers got surly if I asked for help more than once or twice. The computer system was a command line thing from the 80s. If you got stuck, you had to call a tech support line for help. My first shift, the guy who was training me left for lunch and I was alone in the store for an hour. Towards the end of my shift, we ran out of pennies. I was told to just round up or down and try to balance the till. I got in trouble for an unbalanced till later on. The back room was literally just unlabeled piles. People would walk back there and throw crap to the back. There was no way of knowing what was in there. I quit after 3 shifts. Story 22. Old Navy, 1 shift. It wasn't even out of anything bad, but it was just too chaotic. I loved the brand at the time, mid-noughties, and thought it would be heaven on earth. They even hired me on the spot. The earphone things were distracting. I was told they'd be there until 2 a.m. sometimes, just not me. Story 23. Worked 1 week at a movie theater. The pay was minimum wage. They promised you could also watch movies for free and get free popcorn. The free popcorn turned out to be a tiny cup full of popcorn. We had to count all of the cups and popcorn buckets at both the start and end of every shift. Story 24. I was hard up on cash in college and responded to an ad for a home caregiver person for a quadriplegic man. Interviewed with him, and he was very nice, and I had no problem with poop and washing and stuff. Turns out he wanted me to jack him off after bath time. Nope, bye, dude. Story 25. I interviewed for a recruitment agency a while back, and one of the questions they asked me was what sort of things I would spend the bonus/commission on. I had to think and said, probably saving up for a deposit on a house. They asked me to think again and later said that often having multiple goals, for example, new car, holiday, technology, etc., helped you to put the time into scoring that next commission. They ended up offering me the role, but after having a think about the red flags that interview gave me, I noped out of that company, and for that matter, the entire field of recruitment/sales, and instead moved into supply chain. Story 26. Worked at Dollar General for 2 days. On my last day, a lady drops a jar of pickles and manager wants me to clean it up. I go find the mop. Inside the bucket is filled with what looks like vomit that must have been cleaned up weeks prior. I find no soap and no place to empty and refill the bucket. So I go ask the manager where to refill it. She gets annoyed, tells me there's nothing wrong with the water already in it. I've been using it for weeks like that. Nah, I quit. Story 27. I worked in logistics for a single day. It was the worst ducking job I had ever worked at. And honestly, I feel bad for anyone who works there. Imagine wasting the one life you have doing that crap. So originally, my job was going to be assembling and disassembling printers, computers, and other hardware, which is something I quite like doing. You'd basically be given a full printer/PC/whatever, accompanied with a task on your computer that said, take this part and this part. And then you'd get to work on taking the devices apart and grabbing whichever part you needed, and the rest got recycled. This wasn't so bad, especially considering I got almost 20 euros an hour for it. And for 19-year-old me, that was awesome. But last minute, the guy who needed to train me was sick. So they told me I had to work on another station for a month. Not so bad, I thought, but I was wrong. In this station I now worked, we had 6 bins in a rectangle shape, and in the middle of those, we had a pallet full of boxes. I'm talking a stack of 200 to 500 tiny boxes. The bins were all labeled such as plastics, styrofoam, metal, etc. Now I'm on to my task. I had to open box, see what's in the box, usually printer parts, which is important to note for later. Toss whatever was in the box into the right container for recycling. Once you are done with pallet 1, then comes pallet 2, and repeat for 8 hours a day. Open box, empty box, open box, empty box. You get the idea. Doing this is straight up mental torture for me. It does not help that I have ADHD. There was just no end in sight. So, as if that wasn't bad enough, these printer parts and boxes were often full of printer ink and printer ink dust, which was just a very colorful, fine dust that got everywhere and can't be washed out. I inhaled so much printer dust that day, I feel like I shortened my lifespan by 20 years. I finished my shift, but I quit that job instantly after. Duck working in logistics. The money is good, but that's literally all. I have roughly 30,000 days to live on this earth, and I don't exactly intend to spend them like that. Story 28. I was a tutor in college. This was the early 90s. I made $50 a week for about 10 hours work. I mostly helped Asian ESL students. Did it for a week or so when this kid from Thailand came in. His name was Ace. We hit it off. He was hip as duck, rode vintage Japanese motorcycles, listened to cool music, smoked cool cigarettes, wore cool crap. He was funny, generous, complimentary, and considerate. I knew he had major money, but he wasn't an asshole about it. After he got an A on a paper I helped him with, he said, "Hey, what your grade average?" I said, 4.0. He said, "You like make money?" I said, "Yeah, I like to make money." He said, "Okay, I help you, you help me. English, I not have. Money, you not have. You see? We can make business together. One together partner, also my friend. All my friend. Not good English, but they have money. You can help them?" I never stepped foot in the tutoring center again. Story 29, part-time FedEx. Had some problems at home and needed the extra money. Only worked Saturdays. Started in September or October, I think. At first, it wasn't that bad. You got paid a preset amount for finishing your truck, not per hour. So essentially, the faster you get finished, the sooner you go home. Check is the same no matter what. Got there at 7 a.m., usually finished up around 3, maybe 5 at latest. I'm pretty sure this is cause I'm new. Once you really know your route, you get faster. Then the holidays came, the package load increased by a lot, which honestly didn't seem like that big of a deal. The real problem was I don't really know my route. I only worked 1 day a week. I think some people though might be able to pick things up super quick. I'm not that kind of person. I'm sure it's easier when you work 5 days a week. My trainer could look at a box, know exactly what neighborhood it was in, where the house was located and what kind of dog they had, the wife's name and where she wants her packages, when they are out on vacation, the color of their car. I couldn't do that. I would have to fumble around with my GPS. This extended my time by a lot. I started not getting home until dark. They would send a couple other drivers to help me after they were done with their routes. But the day where I was out in the snow, Texas it rarely snowed, driving this truck around at night trying to drop off packages, I can barely see street addresses and get home before 10 p.m. I said, nope, I can't do this anymore. It's just not worth my time. Story 30. In my case, I didn't quit. I was technically fired after a few minutes. It was a tutoring job. The kid burst into tears after meeting me. Mom kindly told me that my services were no longer needed. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Story 31. Double glazing interviewer. The idea was that interviewers would be dropped off in an area to conduct surveys on home insulation. We would then recommend a consultation with an expert salesman whenever it turned out that the person needed more insulation. I started at 10 a.m. for training and left at 12 whenever we took a break for lunch. Story 32. Got a job at my country's version of Dollar Tree. I quit it on my 10th day there. Went home during lunch break and never came back till this day. Toxic, evil supervisors treated me like crap and the store had no working toilet. Story 33. Happy to tell this story. I took a job at one of the Grotto locations in Houston. I was a bartender. Every glass behind the bar, and even having come straight out of the washing machine, was filthy. The bartender training me was just like, yeah, that's just the way it is. I went into the kitchen and saw that they were using bread that had been out to tables already to just rebuild bread baskets for new customers. Didn't matter that the bread had been touched and picked through. A guy dropped some of the bread on the floor and picked it back up to go into a basket. I said something about it and he was like, we don't waste anything here. I noped the duck out of that place right then. Didn't say a word to anyone, just walked out. Don't think I'd been there more than an hour. Story 34. I worked at a place for one day where we were supposed to trick people into signing up for magazines that they wouldn't ever be able to cancel, I guess. Calling people and then trying to convince them to buy by giving us their credit card and telling them they were getting something free and then they had to call back and cancel. The person training me told me she would sell to anyone blind, old, stupid. She didn't care, that was her job. I didn't go back the second day. Story 35. My first office job, I quit after 5 days. The first thing that pushed me out. It was an MLM masquerading as a job placement agency. As soon as I found that out, I started applying for anything and everything else. The second and final thing that led me to quit without another job lined up. The CEO looked at my phone after I got a text message and started screaming at me about, who are you auditing for? At maximum decibels for 2 hours, never letting me get a word in edgewise. He only stopped when I shoved the phone in his face. Why? Because the text message was for an audition at the community theater. I told him to get his illiterate, psychotic ass the duck out of my cubicle, packed up and left, middle finger in the air the whole time. Afterward, I reported his business to the state's Chamber of Commerce and told every single person I knew was job searching to stay as far away from them as possible. I've not heard of them since, so I can only assume they folded. Good ducking ridden. Story 36. Telemarketer walked out first day. There was a job I quit quicker than that, but it was because the company straight up lied about the position. They clearly said warehouse work with forklift experience and even insisted you bring steel toe safety C-scorts. When I get there, I find out leave your C-scorts off. You're gonna work on the most miserable assembly line I've ever seen. Apparently, you have to work your way up to warehouse work. It was obvious they had to lie to get people to come in because the job was just minimum wage misery. Story 37. I worked one shift at an appliance delivery company. Talks about beating and killing ladyboys and wishing that sand should go back to their country. I told the manager at the end of my shift what I'd heard and was told, if you can't handle it here, there's the door. Said, sounds good to me, and left. Story 38. I got a job at Dairy Queen when I was in high school. On my first day, the manager asked me if I wanted to work the grill or ice cream. They were separate counters back then. I chose ice cream, and she told me that most guys worked the grill, I'm male, and that girls typically worked ice cream. I told her that ice cream sounded fine to me. She put me on the grill. The manager went to the back of the store to get someone to train me. While she was gone, a family friend came in, saw me standing there in a DQ hat. He told me that he'd hire me to work in his furniture warehouse if I didn't like DQ. I told him that I didn't like it so far. When the manager returned with the trainer, I gave her my hat and quit and headed off to unload furniture trucks. I loved that job. I worked there all through high school and college and a little while after. Story 39. So I was looking for part-time work and they wanted me to work the photo processing at one of their flagship locations. Great. They tell me to meet so-and-so and she will be in at 8 a.m. I get there at 7:40 a.m. I tell the other people there that I am there to meet so-and-so. They tell me she normally doesn't come in on that day and that department is normally closed due to her not being there on the weekend. I explain I was told she would be training me and it would most likely be me who would be working those days. Okay, so I am in the store. I figure I would just wander around, look at everything. 1 hour passes, nothing. Another half an hour, and still a no-show. I just leave and never looked back. Quickest job I ever had. Story 40. Door-to-door sales, half a day of pitch training, then out into the suburbs to sell for 5 hours. 2 teams of newbies and 2 managers. First order of business, team 1 sets off, myself included, into a gated retirement complex through a hole in a hedge. Lots of money to be made here, guys and gals. Get busy. Drop my ID, clipboard, and promotional gear in the nearest bin only way back to the train station. Not bad for 4 hours of employment. Story 41. When I was young, just out of college, I was hired by Cutco. This was pre-internet, so it was a lot harder to research companies and see what they were about. I lasted half a day before I realized it was just door-to-door selling and then quit. Story 42. The summer between the end of high school and the beginning of college, I was hired as a fry cook at a local fair. The fair only ran for 2 weeks at the end of summer vacation, so it's not like I had a long-term position. My position actually just entailed cutting potatoes into fries. The owners of the truck were terrible at scheduling shifts. Most of the time I worked during the day, and there was little to no business during the day. So there would be like 7 of us sitting in the food truck, making about 5 orders an hour, if that. We weren't allowed on our phones, and the AC in the truck was broken, so we'd spend most of our time standing there. I worked a couple of evening shifts, and it was the polar opposite. There was the owners and maybe 1 or 2 other people. The evenings are where orders started ramping up, so the 1 or 2 poor souls who worked evenings would be scrambling to get orders done. I wasn't a fan of either environment and quit a week in, telling them that I had to prepare for college. Story 43. Not me, but an old coworker who recounted to me a take of woe from when he was a teenager. His mom worked at a factory where assembly lines of chip bags, like Ruffles, Cheetos, Lay's, etc., were being produced. She got him a position as one of the people who'd pack the bags into boxes and onto pallets. The bags would come down a conveyor belt and he'd package them. It was overnight shift as well. After several hours on the job, he couldn't handle it anymore. He told me that he had some kind of spaz attack and began just yanking the bags off the conveyor belt, throwing them on the floor and kicking and stomping them furiously. He did this for almost 10 minutes before a supervisor caught him. By then, his entire workstation was a mess of chips and ripped open bags, and he was thrashing about in a rage amongst a swamp of ruined bags of chips. He wasn't let go at that point, though. No, the supervisor told him to take a short break and then get back to work. He promptly left the building and never returned. A few months after that, his mother told him that he'd been placed on a do not hire risk of violence list that the company had. Story 44. 1. Retail store. First day was training, which didn't involve much of anything, just moving clothes around and folding. Showed up for the second shift and 2 rude employees basically said, "Okay, go to the jeans section," and then spent the next 20 minutes just chatting and ignoring me. I went to the back, grabbed my stuff, and left without saying a word. I don't even think they noticed me. 2. Another retail store. On the first day, they told me they didn't have anyone to train me and to spend 8 hours walking around the store, familiarizing myself with the product. An hour later, I left, and the boss called me asking to give it another shot. The next day, the miserable assistant manager complained about the company, and when I asked how long she had worked there, she responded, "Way too long." I left again and never looked back. 3. Was hired to manage a cafe/restaurant. Halfway through the first shift, the alcohol inspector showed up to make sure we all had Smart Serve and that the establishment had the proper license. I was not informed that we served alcohol, so I didn't have that, and the business wasn't licensed to serve. I did finish off my shift, but obviously couldn't return to that. Story 45, McDonald's. I think I worked like 4 days. 2 days one week, 2 days the following week. They didn't offer any training and expected to me make parfaits. When I got that wrong, they put me on fry duty. I heard a guy order 4 large fries, so I got them together before he finished the rest of the order, so it hadn't technically come through. The manager saw 4 large fries sitting there, waiting, then threw them out because I should only prep her mediums. No apology from her after I had to make a new batch to fill the 4 large once it came through seconds later. They didn't schedule me for a whole week, so I just decided I wasn't going back. They called me the next time I was on the schedule and asked where I was. I told them I wasn't going to make it in. Edit. They also threw me on a drive-through register for an hour, mid-shift, without giving me a new drawer, or having me count it down before or after I took over, and tried to claim I was $50 under. They didn't write me up, but gave me a warning saying they could fire me for just 50 cents. Story 46. Books A Million. They require you to try and sell membership cards. I personally think it's a great deal, but after the manager lectured me for not asking someone who barely had enough change to pay for their 1 book, I knew it was time to leave. Story 47. The place I was working for went out of business, and I needed to make some cash while I searched for a decent job. I had worked at a telemarketing firm a few years before and knew they'd hire anyone who walked through the door. So that's what I did. Went through their week-long training, and then for my first day on the phones, I walked in the front door, looked at the floor of people taking calls, and just felt a wave of self-hatred and depression wash over me. I really hated working the one previous telemarketing gig, and I just couldn't do it. walked out the back door, and only went back to get my paycheck for my week of training. Story 48. Private pain clinic after 3 months. This place was definitely committing insurance fraud actively and had a nearly 80-year-old doc handing narcs. One day, after not getting paid on time for the third period in a row, I walked out and threatened legal action for my money. Story 49. This one is kind of tricky because I was technically there for 3 months, but the first 2 months were training. I was hard up for work because I left a warehouse job that was destroying me mentally. My roommate told me about his brother who worked for Time Warner doing inbound sales. Basically, they call you looking for service. I thought that sounded great, and his brother was making some serious cash, so I signed on. The building was an hour away from where I lived, but the pay would easily make up for it. During the 2 months of training, it all seemed well. The trainer was fun, seemed to love his work, and made sure to emphasize that it was a no-pressure sales environment. Customers call in, and you ask some qualifying questions, then recommend a package that would be best for them. Once training was done, though, it was made very clear that was not the case. I had been pulled into my manager's office twice in 2 weeks because I wasn't pushing up sales. An old lady had called and asked for just the slowest internet we offered because she only uses it to check her email. The manager told me I needed to offer her the fastest possible because what if her grandkids are sending her tons of pictures and videos? I lasted a month because I really needed the cash, but then I had to quit. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. Everything they told me about the job was a lie, including the pay. But I learned my roommate's brother had no issue lying to people to get what he wanted, so there's that. Story 50. I worked at an aluminum foundry for about 2 weeks. Everyone seemed miserable, and you could see the foundry sand floating in the air. Only at a certain time of day when the sun poked through 2 black spray-painted windows. They made me get chest x-rays before starting to make sure I didn't already have lung cancer, I assume. I have never heard of this before. No one wore a mask inside besides me and one other guy. The black boogers that would come out in the shower after work were absolutely insane. I was like 21 at the time and didn't want to die by 40. I got injured, non-work related, and said I wouldn't be back. They offered more money and I laughed. It was also after a mediocre performance review and I was eager to learn, showed up on time every day and busted my ass taking on new roles and absorbing knowledge. 3 out of 5 in every category? You can go duck off and suck up all the silica sand you want. Story 51. First day training to fix phones at a local phone repair shop. Owner had his dog with him all day. Never once took it out. Late in the day, it's starting whining to go out. Owner screamed and smacked the dog to shut up. I went out for a smoke on my last break and just went home. Story 52. Starbucks. The customer base is the most disgusting, entitled, nasty, and straight up selfish I've ever had to deal with. And all for an overpriced drink or sandwich. Story 53. Welding job at a Navy yard. Had all the certs, passed the background, etc. Was a specialty welding copper nickel sale pipes and some crazy copper/titanium bonded thermal sinks. So it paid a ductin, $95 per hour in 2004. Took one look into the pipe chases that I would be welding in. It's over 120 degrees in there before I start. Yeah, I had a fresh air suit, but I didn't want to die. Just told the guy, I get heat stroke too easy. You'll find me a week later in there, dead man. Cool dude though. He was like, well, at least we know now rather than later. Dropout rate is high on this crap. Hence the pay, so I prefer when people are upfront with me. Shook my hand, gave me some cash for gas, and sent me on my way. Hell, he even gave me a reference, doing outdoor welding with a logging outfit. Though that was only $20 an hour, it was much better work. I've always tried to emulate that as a boss. Show them around, let them know exactly what they will be doing, and ask if they're comfortable with the duties. Because I'd rather call the next guy on the list than try to go back through the hiring/interview process a couple weeks later. Story 54. I quit a job at the city. Circuit City's failed attempt to remain relevant and, in business. The day I received my first weekly schedule. I was in college at the time. I had been very specific in the interview that my education would be my priority at all times. I had provided my availability, complete with leeway necessary to make the drive between work and school should the need arise. The first schedule had me set to work during class, outside my availability, and twice in the first week. I called the manager to get this addressed and was told that they would fix it for the next week, but that I should go ahead and show up for these shifts or else I would give the appearance that this job was not my priority. I reminded them it wasn't my priority and quit. Story 55 maybe doesn't qualify since I technically didn't get that far, but I had an interview at a parts/tool retailer. He called while I was at work for a different company, sweet-talked me with growth incentives and we promote within mentality. I said I could come after work that day for an interview, but I wouldn't be interview ready as I would be going straight from work. He said, yeah, no worries. I show up for the interview and he says, really, shorts to an interview? I threw up the deuces and walked back out the door, didn't even shake the guy's hand. Story 56. I have quit a lot of jobs, but one was a large oil company in Southern California. I was supposed to pass out the mail, but then on the second week, The manager said they were letting go of all the temp workers. And then I was supposed to set up all the new computers in the office. I was like, no, I am not an IT person. Goodbye by Story 57. Costumer service. I was working for an online provider, and the amount of people screaming at you. I couldn't bear the yelling and insults. Within 3 months, I had a burnout. Story 58. I was a debt collector for a couple of months. I had no knowledge how debt collection worked prior to starting this job, and to this day am shocked that it is legal. Whenever you default on a loan and it goes to a third-party debt collection agency, your debt is bought and sold for pennies on the dollar. On the screen, when I would collect debt from a person, would be a percentage of the total amount they owed that would indicate the absolute lowest I could settle their account for. However, most agents would never go that low because we would get commission on all of the debt we settled over that amount. That's right, we would get commission on debt we collected from people who were unable to pay and incentivized to make them pay more than they actually had to pay. I remember during my first week, I was trying to collect on an account that was owed by a guy that lost everything because he had cancer, and my heart dropped, and I told him he's owed the lowest amount I could settle the account for. I was written up the same day by my boss because I didn't try to get him to pay more. Anyways, I made it a little over a month with that company, and most of that was spent in training. Duck that place. Story 59. Applied at my favorite thrift store for an entry-level dispatcher position, dispatching donation collection trucks. It became almost immediately obvious that the manager was a complete tool. He told me that it was the dispatcher's last day at the company, so there would be nobody to train me properly. He made fun of me for having a passport instead of a social security card. He made fun of another employee who replied, "Thanks for that, Brian," in a really fed-up, exhausted way. He told me that the drivers would purposely duck with me and lie to me, and I'd have to hold them all accountable and would get in trouble if I believed the lies. He informed me that they still worked with a big paper map instead of proper GPS software. Then, at the end of the interview, he said I had the job. "See you Monday. Oh, and don't park on such and such street because they'll tow. No parking in the store lot." I called back about an hour later and said that something had come up and I couldn't take the job. Story 60. Boomer here. So this is old, happened just out of high school. Friend got me a job where he worked. My job was to help this guy process some type of metal for electronic parts. It involved mixing it with acetone and something similar to a cement mixer. I think we wore masks, but the smell was unbearable. I only lasted a day or two. I heard later that his skin turned yellow and he developed some kind of cancer. Story 61. Zoop. I found out I was pregnant the day I got the job. I had hyperemesis. Because it was food service, I had to let them know it wasn't communicable. When I informed the manager, she looked at me and told me I already had 4 kids and abortions aren't that bad these days. My husband picked me up that day and I never went back. Story 62. Got a call my first day at Applebee's. Was told that I was hired to operate an elevator for $3 more an hour. In cash. $100 a day to sit in a chair in a metal box all day. I pressed a button. Elevator, go down to hole. Story 63. Worked at a McDonald's for a week. Put me on register my first day. Wouldn't tell me how to figure out the system, and they'd get mad when I'd ring something in wrong or go ask the manager a question. Wasn't worth it to me. Story 64. Door-to-door sales of debit machines and service to the machines to business owners. Wasn't really sales. We basically had to convince them to cancel their current provider and go with us. It was too scummy for me. Story 65. Delivery. Full-time job. 12 hours on my feet. About 20 deliveries complete, and I've got a salary about $15. It was really rainy day. I even caught cold. After one day of work, I quit. Story 66. Wendy's. I did like an orientation shift and said I quit, and the manager tried to convince me to stay, saying one day I could be a manager and afford an in-ground pool. Story 67. Shoney's. One shift of training, then given a schedule that would have had me working until the early mornings while I was in high school hours later. Story 68. Worked 1 day and a half in a chicken factory. First day, got sick because of the conveyor belt moving in front of me. The strong smells, a strong bad smell mixed with the spices smells, and the texture of sloppy, cold, raw chicken. My colleagues who were working here for years were telling me stories of how they would sometimes find chicken's head while working, and of course it didn't help me in getting better. The next day, after like 3 to 4 hours of work, I literally threw up I asked to go to the toilets as soon as I felt it coming. People were very kind with me and told me it was okay, not everyone is built for jobs like these. I was crying my eyes out. I felt weak and very disappointed in myself. So the company kindly told me that I could leave if I wanted. So I kind of quit, or got fired, but I agreed with it before, I don't really know. Story 69. I worked at a factory for about 2 weeks under a temp agency. First, I was in one area 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. for about 2 days. Then they moved me to a different area working 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. for the next 3 days. Then they moved me again to a third area working 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. the following week. Then back to the first area the last day. While working in that area, I smashed my hand, which swelled so much I couldn't get my Nomex glove off. They told me I was not allowed to leave and get back to ducking work. I walked out, called the temp agency to tell them I wasn't going back and why. Temp agency told me exactly which doctor to go to and the info for getting my treatment taken care of. Hand wasn't broken, but had to be in a wrap for a few weeks. Last I heard, the temp agency had dropped that factory as a client. Story 70, CSR. It's not that I don't want to take calls or talk to people. It's hard for me to hear complaints coming from old people, but you can't do anything because you're just taking their calls. I worked in a BPO company here in the PH, and my client was based in the US. We're handling properties, apartments and such. One time, I received a call from one of our tenants. I think she was in her 60s to 70s and living alone. She's complaining about her broken heater and she's very cold and crying when she called me. As much as I want to help her, I can't do anything other than forwarding her concern to our property manager. Story 71. Applied for McDonald's as my first job in high school, went to the interview, and got the job. Never showed up after that. I hadn't filled out paperwork or gotten a uniform, so I don't know if I was considered hired. I avoided that McDonald's for over a year, thinking they're going to wonder why I never showed up. No disrespect to anyone who works at McDonald's. I worked in a few high-traffic customer service roles after that, so I got my fair share of that type of work in and have nothing but respect for those who have to work with customers daily. Story 72. Technically, it would be Sesame Place. I was scheduled to start the week after finals, but they moved up my start date about 3 weeks, so while I was in class still. They then texted a wrong number one time. As my notification of this, fired me but considered it a no-call, no-show where I quit as I was in class blissfully unaware. I showed up about a half hour early on the only start date I knew of and found out I had quit/been fired before I ever started and that the position was already filled. A great start to the summer. Story 73. Temp job agency said there would be no heights over 20 feet. Construction assignment wanted me to climb up 4 flights of stairs in a stick-frame new apartment building, then get on a ladder up to roof trusses, then climb through roof trusses and pop out of a hole onto the plywood-sheathed roof. Job would consist of walking out to edge of roof to grab bundles of shingles from a tall skid loader. I took one look and walked out. And story 74, kids soccer referee. The parents were just horrible. These kids were 6 to 8. They're not coordinated and they trip over each other constantly. But the parents would scream at me every time they fell over or kicked the ball at the kid picking flowers. I think I lasted 3 games. Story 75, Pizza Hut. Surprisingly, there's a lot of Karens there and my coworkers suck. They take the day of basically most of the time they work, and whenever I go on break, someone's telling me to come back, or when I'm off, someone wants to take their shift. It's horrible. It's story 76. Burger King. I was 14 to 15, started at 10:30 a.m. First lunch shift of my first real job, besides paper route. Absolutely slammed. People out the door got yelled at for wearing my hat wrong. By 2:30, I left and never returned. Best job I ever quit. And only story 77. I was hired to be a networking engineer. I had just passed my CCNA way back when. I also had a few years experience working with Cisco equipment and some weird off-brand stuff. I knew networking backwards and forwards for the times anyway. The interview was very short. I had 30 minutes with one guy, 5 to 10 minutes with 2 to 3 other people, and they grabbed my PII for some background checks. Does that mean I'm hired? As long as you pass the background check. I got called back later that evening. They sent me an offer letter and wanted me to start the following Monday. I said, I want to give my previous job 2 weeks notice. The guy sounded taken aback. Okay. Well, Monday is your orientation. Okay. My previous job was pretty toxic anyway, so I quit that Friday. Monday, I got to work and I got shuttled away in a tour bus to a very large group of people for orientation in a hotel ballroom. It was a goddamn circus. Lights or trusses, spotlights, loud rock music, and some guy on a headset running up and down the stage. Turned out the company was one of those huge MLMs and later a front to Amway, Quickstar or something. Oh, so maybe they sent me here to learn about the company, but I was just one guy among 500 people, all whooped up with free shirts, water bottles, and promises in being our own boss. There was a game show, film testimonies on huge jumbo screens. By the time they were over, half the crowd was insane. I called the people I had contact info for. Do it fair, guys? Nobody answered their phones. They wanted me to submit my credit card for some $400 package, and I said I was hired to be a computer network administrator. I think I got on the wrong bus. The pressure was enormous to buy the package. I lied and said I didn't think I'd have to bring a credit card my first day of work, so I didn't. Do you have a checkbook? No. Cash? Not $400, etc. They took me to another room, where men in suits all but threatened me for breach of contract. I asked them to show me the contract. Then they left me alone in a room where the lights kept going off after 10 minutes of inactivity. Finally, they sent me out. The pass to get back on the bus to drive back to where I parked my car was to prove I bought this package. So I called a cab instead. It cost me $60 to get back from the hotel to my car in midtown traffic. I was pissed. I called them back the next day with a loud, "What the hell, man? I am a CCNA certified networking technician, not a sales guy." "Yeah, but don't you believe in the company? As an employee, we all have to make our sales quota." "Oh, duck no." I took that offer letter and reported them to the labor board. They actually took my case, and I got paid for that day, but not at the rate advertised. Thankfully, days later, another job I applied for called me and asked if I was still interested. I was hired 2 weeks later. Story 78. Wanted to discover other jobs in healthcare. Tried working at a psychiatric hospital because I do honestly have a passion for helping people, especially with mental illness. I lasted a month. The nurses and older techs there were all so mean and awful. Like, I get burnout is real, but if you hate your job to the point of taking it out on other people, you need a new job. Watched a nurse scream at a patient because the patient asked for something to help with a migraine she was having. They treated the patients like they were prison inmates. And all I could think is, why are we punishing people for seeking help? That and company policies sucked. Was frequently yelled at because I would give snacks to patients, as long as they weren't diabetic and had a high blood sugar, in the middle of the night. Like, for one, the snack cabinet got restocked every day. And for two, why escalate a patient of something silly like cheese crackers? Also, since I worked night shift, we still had to go in and check every 15 minutes to make sure our patients were still okay. Except you would get written up if you didn't shine a flashlight in their face to make sure they were breathing. Also, you had to go all the way in the room by yourself. Like, yes, let's taking someone having a mental health crisis and have the staff come into the room every 15 minutes and shine a flashlight right in their face. They also would admit anyone to the facility, all about making money. So we had patients with dementia wandering around, frequently trying to go in people's rooms on the same floor as patients who were aggressive. Like, yes, we do check on them every 15 minutes, but that's still plenty of time to have something horrible happen. It was disheartening to hear that my experience working for one wasn't unique, that most psych facilities are like that. It still really bothers me though. These poor people, half of them being forced to go to a facility like this, and then being treated like they committed a crime. Like, yes, absolutely enforce rules that keep patients safe, but treated them like they did something wrong isn't going to help someone. Story 79. I wouldn't say it was fast, but I spent 3 weeks after college working at a construction site running cable, fiber, internet, etc. for a college campus. I didn't initially know that the building wasn't done and that it was under active construction, so I was working around smelly dudes all day, running really heavy cables along the ground and ceiling in 90-degree weather with a hard hat. Didn't help that the site lead was an asshat who didn't want a college kid on his team. I had enough of that dude and left on the 3rd week after constant harassment and just putting up with it. Story 80. 3 weeks. They have a revolving door. One of the guys who started 3 days before I did was the laziest jackass I've ever met. Plus, he sucked up to the bosses and they mostly fell for it. One day he was actually doing dishes because I'd complained that he slacks off, so he had a talking to. I rushed by doing my own crap and he asked me to pick a spoon off of the floor. I just leaned down, picked it up, and then handed it to him. He said, "Thank you." I just have a thing about picking spoons up off the floor. I just have a thing about bending down to pick anything up off of the floor, actually. Like he had done it to degrade me? I was like, what? Wow. The next shift, there were no managers in and he slacked off even more than before. And the next shift after that, the shift leaders were curt with me because I rarely come in on my days off anywhere and I rarely come in early anymore. I used to bend over backwards for work, but I realized it just isn't worth it to become a doormat that people wipe their crafty cessports on. You give an inch, they take a mile, and then another mile. So the curt attitude, we had to work extra because you didn't answer your phone, along with seeing that the lazy jackass was again slacking off even more because the managers had finished their shift. I actually just walked off the job after a few hours. He was also gloating that he was allowed to finish early that day, and I knew that it meant he would drag his feet even more. I hope me leaving meant he had to stay to closing. It was a bummer to quit because one of the other guys who had started a few days after I had was a kick-ass worker. We got on really well, and he'd feel bad if he thought I was doing more work than him, so he'd offer to do a job, but I was just like, no, it's okay, I'm just chugging along, doing whatever needs to be done, and I know you are as well. He had actually come in early that day, and when I arrived, I could tell he was really tense. He said that the lazy duck was being his usual self, and that he was ready to just walk. I really hope he doesn't work with that little anymore. Oh, and another part of why I quit was because I realized that lazy ass was filling in the daily logbook and was initialing his name beside tasks he hadn't actually done. So I started watching him fill it out and would say what tasks people had done. Mother Ducker wasn't going to be taking credit for something he didn't do anymore. One time he realized his name wasn't on much and he said, I have to make it look like I've done something, huh? Make it look like you're working for 8 hours, ducking actually do something. It's harder to pretend you're busy doing duck all than it is to actually keep yourself busy, you lazy pig. Imagine living your life that way. No self-respect at all. I've literally never met someone as profoundly lazy as him, and I thought my first cousins were. Also, one of the guys who had worked there a long time actually got mad at him a few times because he was hiding out front talking to the floor staff. I had told the longtime guy about lazy kid's lack of work ethic, and he said, "You know, you aren't wrong, actually. I've noticed that." Story 81, Intel Data Center. When I got there, because of the work the group did, I thought I was under some high-speed guys. Half a year later, I quit because I was now convinced this was a group put out to pasture because they were with Intel so long they couldn't be fired. But you had to put them somewhere. They wouldn't piss everyone else off. If the rest of Intel works like that, I can see why AMD has railed them the last decade. At least I was able to add some good buzzwords to my resume and am now in a FANG position. Story 82, Guitar Center. TBH, I just didn't want to pay my dues and start in accessories. I was more knowledgeable than most of the floor guys in guitars, and a lot nicer to the customers. Just didn't seem like the kind of place where I'd put in 6 to 9 months just to do the job I was the best fit for. Lasted about 4 days. Story 83, Supervisory Budget Analyst for the National Security Agency. Within 2 weeks, I knew I wasn't long for it. I was there for 30 days and had to get out. Horrible, horrible crap you would totally believe but couldn't imagine. So ready to quit my job. Tell me your best. Duck this, I quit story. Story 1. Was a senior designer at a company and was making $120,000, and they said that was market rate. Asked my boss for at least a 10% raise. He said no. I was doing all the work and staying up late at night. A company found me and poached me. They paid a whole $80,000 more. When I took the job, my boss was pissed as hell. Told him the company only exists because I was there. 3 months later, my boss got fired. He didn't know how to do the job when I was gone. Story 2. My boss ignored me for 5 months, canceled every one-to-one, never followed up on anything I sent, never said any work. Then my first day back from vacation, I get put on a PIP. Apparently, I'm not meeting expectations despite never having had any expectations set, or even a job description. I interviewed for a much better job, got it, and quit the crap manager. I managed one person and she quit 2 days after finding out I was going. Said she didn't want to stay in that place if I went. My final day came, I left. Then 2 days later, a former colleague messages me to say that the boss who tried to fire me himself got fired in a team meeting in front of everyone. So yeah, karma, I guess. Story 3. One of my engineers gave a formal 2-week notice. On their last day, they gave me a sorry for your loss sympathy card. Opened it up and it said, "It's me." Still have that card on my desk. One of my proudest moments was that level of shenanigans coming from one of my engineers. Story 4. I have a friend who did card tricks. He quit during the end of year teacher meeting. He was doing a card tricks for the superintendent. The last card said, "I'm out," and he walked out. Story 5. I once put in a week notice at an IT job that was beyond awful with nothing lined up. Spent the last week letting tickets pile up while I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Online. Story 6. I quit a job of nearly 9 years with no notice and no plan. I had sort of a mini panic attack at work and started adding up my assets in my head to figure out how long I could go without a job. Cleaned up my workstation, emptied out my locker, and told my supervisor, "I think I have to quit." Best part, the lady in HR was so proud of me for quitting, she put extra vacation days on my last check. Story 7. I'd be tempted to say nothing until the last day, poke your head into the boss's office, say, "I think I'm indispensable here, and I deserve a raise." They will say, "No, you're not indispensable." "Well, yo, you're about to find out. Bye." Story 8. Best story is when I found another job and told my manager I was giving them notice. The best thing you can do is not allow your current employer to let you know that they got the best of you. Story 9. When I was 19, I was working at an In-N-Out. I worked 6 days a week. My grandmother passed away and I only took 1 day off to grieve. The next day, my performance wasn't up to my normal level and my manager noticed it. He gave me crap and sent me home early. I said duck this and duck him, then never showed up for work again. Story 10. I just quit a few days ago, and it was great. My bosses were POS and said I was never going to get a raise. I was hired to do one job, and they had me doing everyone's job. They bullied me a lot too, and treated me like dirt. Then my stepdad needed me for an emergency, and they said they couldn't give me the day off or even let me leave early. "We don't have enough staff, and you didn't give us a 2 weeks notice." It was an emergency situation, and I didn't get a notice. "What do you mean?" So I just didn't go in. Then I got a job offer for a better opportunity and got hired within a few hours, so I just said duck them and never went back. It was fabulous. I start my new job tomorrow, making more money, and I'm stoked. Story 11. Older doctor at a major city county hospital crap hole. Comes in one day, going through the motions, and gets told, "Congrats on your 20 years here at the hospital." Looks up, walks out, and comes back a little later after verifying saying adios, and he was done. He completely ran an entire department and was just gone after hitting that pension. Story 12. Fresh out of college, I worked with kids in an after-school program for about 2 years. I was dedicated, hardworking, Everyone only had good things to say about the work I did. A full-time employee, administration during school hours, then worked directly with kids in the afternoon, was getting ready to retire, and I clearly expressed how I wanted to fill the full-time position when they left. My manager would dangle it in front of me, ask me to do extra tasks, like working in outside of normal hour dinners, saying things like, "This is usually what the full-time employees do." So I did, ready to show how I could handle what the full-time employees did. After doing this for a few weeks, and the announcement came, they brought in someone from another branch to take the full-time position. I went back to my classroom and sobbed. Nothing was said to me about the situation. But within the week, a friend of a friend said she needed a nanny. And in fact, if I could meet them in the Bahamas, first-class travel paid for, in about 2 weeks to watch their toddler, that'd be great. I put in my notice at work, and lo and behold, they suddenly had a full-time position for me. But the damage had been done, I was gone, and I got paid to hang out in the Bahamas for almost a month with the chilliest toddler I ever met. Story 13. My boss was abusive and was supporting another coworker's bullying of me. Many people knew but kept quiet. I sent my boss a one-sentence email stating that I'm resigning and indicating my last workday. And then I said nothing to anyone. When people asked, my answers were vague and mysterious, or I just said I'm not discussing it. By the end of 2 weeks, everyone was sweating bullets because their imagination was so much worse than anything I could tell them. 1 year out, and I'm hearing from a friend that people are still nervous about me. Story 14. Called my boss, said I'm not coming in, and to take me off of the schedule, and called her a Karen because she refused to train me, hired people after me, and trained them before me, and was openly violating the state's laws and FLSA for not paying me my owed wage because I was getting tips. I also notified her that I contacted the health department for multiple code violations and several OSHA violations. I burned that bridge and got her shut down for 6 weeks. Story 15. Right after COVID, I needed a job due to working in the service industry. Got a job as a credit repair specialist. Did I know anything about credit repair? Absolutely not. Did they train you, Barley? I got yelled at every day for the company being a scam and people paying over $100 a month to have their credit repair with no improvement, only making $14 an hour. After one customer yelled at me, I left my access card on my desk and never returned back from lunch. After I sat in the parking lot crying, I said, "Duck it." Story 16. This happened last year. At my last job, I was having personal problems. I had a check-in meeting with my boss, HR lady, and the director of change, BS title, because I was not acting like myself. I told them I went through a personal tragedy and was finding it hard to care. Then it turned into professional problems with my boss and with my coworkers, especially after I got back from vacation. Then I went to lunch, and once I was out of the parking lot, I emailed my letter of resignation. About an hour and a half later, the HR lady calls and asks me what happened. I said, I get no help when I asked it for, that I have to stop what I was doing to help everyone. Dealing with asshat of a managing attorney, 2 coworkers that could deal with the managing attorney emailing them, telling them to mail stuff out the week I was on vacation. A coworker that started being demanding, and that I got a new job. Story 17. Worked at a small digital marketing company remotely. One day they told me one of my colleagues just got up and left and sent a delayed email that read, "I quit" in the subject line. That's it. Nobody ever saw him or heard from him again. Story 18. I know someone who quit their work from home job while sharing her screen in a Teams meeting, opened the email client and typed the resignation letter, clicked send as they asked her to reconsider. Ducking legend story. 19. Prior boss blew me off several months in leadership meetings and made me take all the heat from our VP. He bailed on me right before his said meeting with VP. VP yelled at me again. I said, "Duck this, I'm gardening today." Left the meeting. Resigned in the HR system, citing both crap bosses as the reason. Indicated my end date was that day. Sent an email to my coworkers saying sometimes we hit a breaking point, and today was mine. Worked with most of them for 8 years. That was it. Quit on the spot. Told the VP he can't talk to people this way and left the meeting. Took 2.5 months to find a new job and missed out on $20,000 pay. I'm about 5 months into my new job and love it. Make slightly more. Work much less. No stress, no yelling. Got calls from my boss and his boss about it asking me to stay. They said I overreacted and I took work too personally. Also told me I should work on developing coping skills. I had been sober for over a year and was in counseling. My coping skills were great. That was when I knew 100% these were toxic people. Story 20. HR asked me if I could take my FMLA on a more scheduled basis, and I told them I couldn't because I had PTSD. I went back to my doctor and had myself put on full-time FMLA from intermittent FMLA because I was so sick, and went out on short-term disability because It wasn't worth me killing myself for a team that would actually send HR after me to ask that question. I unfortunately ended up on LTD because I never got any better, but that was my FU. Story 21. I cleaned out my work truck one time, headed to the shop to turn it in, and decided against it. Called the shop, told them where they could find my truck, parked it on the tallest bridge in town, locked my computer, phone, credit card inside, then proceeded to get the keys into the river. The 15-mile walk home was enough for me to cool down and not completely lucid. Story 22. Well, having scoured 100 million LinkedIn posts, I can say with certainty, don't quit before you've worked for 1 month in your new job. That's the new standard for 2025, because so many of these ops just disappear on the day you're supposed to start, and the government does nothing at all. Story 23. Had a manager who was younger. That didn't bother me, but it bothered him. It was his first position of authority, and he abused it horribly. He used to love picking on me and another, also older male coworker, and flirting with female associates. It made everyone uncomfortable. He had so many complaints against him in HR, but HR refused to do crap. This was a retail job while I was in college, and I didn't really need it. It was a second job for extra cash. One night, he tried to pick a fight with me over something stupid. I was sweeping the store, got called to the front counter, and so I went behind it, set my broom down behind me, and started helping customers. This dude started telling me how it's unsafe to keep a broom behind me. I told him he's wrong, that I have an extensive background in assessing safety and security concerns. I do, and that he should leave me alone. He asked to speak with me in the back, and I just lost it. Went back with him, he tried to lecture me, and I exploded. Told him he's a ducking idiot, called him a man-child who would die in retail, took off my company shirt and badge, threw them at his face, left the store with the double deuce flipped at him the whole time. It was quite the scene. I texted my ASM after, told her what I did. The store manager was so funny too, because he called me to say that it was unacceptable and that I'll be on a short leash when I come in for my next shift. I laughed at him and said, "Bro, I don't know what you think that was, but let me be clear. That was me quitting." He reached out on multiple occasions to ask me to come back. The other guy he was harassing was working there because he wanted extra money for a vacation fund with his wife, but his actual career job paid well enough that he hired a lawyer. Him and I were both protected classes, and since HR did nothing, he sued the company, and I got involved in the lawsuit. We won. It wasn't a large amount that ended up in my bank account because it was a big chain, and this kind of harassment was so rampant in the company that it got grouped into a class action lawsuit. But it still felt good. The courts agreed that behavior wasn't okay. I stopped working retail after that. I was a month away from my degree, got that, and started working in tech less than a year later. That was funny, having the store owner trying to get me to go back and me telling him my salary expectations in the tech bracket. I know this sounds like a "and then everyone clapped" situation, but it wasn't. The day it happened was tense. The lawsuit took over a year, so it wasn't swift vindication. I left that job off my resume. The people who were there that day still bring it up when I talk to them and laugh about it. Story 24. I live in Chile. For context of salaries, I was a manager of a store and an administrator for a small company, but also worked somehow, but in HR, paying taxes and everything the company needed, worked in sales, and I was a graphic designer. But I was the one who was paid the least. How did I know? I was the one in charge in giving the salaries. So I asked if it could be bumped from $550 a month to $750. He said yes at first. Fast forward, my salary arrived and it was $690. I immediately asked WTF happened. My boss/owner's answer, "I don't deserve the amount of money I asked." Cried the whole day at my home, grabbed my resign paper and gave it to him the next day. And that was also my last day of work. I was lucky someone hired me immediately, story 25, and worked for an attorney as a paralegal. At time of interview and hire, made her aware that I would need 3 days off for a class I needed for graduating with my master's. At the time, she said no problem at all and approved it all. Week of the days I'm to be off, she chose to deny the days and state, "You need to choose what's more important, your education or your career here with me." Easiest quit of my life. Story 26. I managed a furniture store. The Wednesday was a holiday, Canada Day. Directive was to have sales staff off the Tuesday and in Thursday to start the month, and have the drivers in Tuesday off Thursday, so did just that. They would track sales calls. It was calls to people who had put deposits down to get them to come pay the balance, and I get called at noon from the DM that I hadn't made any calls. No, I hadn't, but had taken in $20,000 in sales by myself, so wasn't going to waste time calling. She wanted me to have the drivers come in and make calls and reschedule all the deliveries. First, not their job. Second, then these people who think they are getting stuff today will need to wait till Friday or Saturday. I told her no, I wasn't doing that, and she needed to come in and talk to me. She said she was too busy and couldn't. That night, after locking up, I gave my keys to one of the drivers and said I was done. Story 27. I work in the restaurant industry. I was hired as a sous chef at a restaurant a week before Mother's Day. During that week leading up to the holiday, I'd ran into multiple instances of insubordination, including one of my line cooks cussing me out on the line. The final straw was the shift before Mother's Day when one of the line cooks tried to explain to me labor costs. Like, dude, they hired me to do this job because I have the experience necessary to understand these things. Needless to say, I didn't show up to work on Mother's Day, one of the busiest days of the year in the restaurant industry. I hope they enjoyed getting wrecked and being one employee short. Bet it made for a hell of a holiday for them. Story 28. Boss told me to come up with my own PIP. I told her sure. And then I handed in my resignation the next day, and the look of terror on her face on having to basically repurpose the entire team to accommodate my work was a sight to behold. Hopefully, I will never have to endure that satisfaction again, and I'll have a manager that doesn't belittle or troll me with useless activates. Story 29. The job I had when I moved here was completely awful. Impossible deadlines, overbearing leads, people losing their tempers and screaming and yelling every day. Each day was worse than the previous day. Then one day I realized I had been there exactly 6 months. I went home for lunch and never went back. I didn't plan it that way. I just sort of happened. In hindsight, had I stayed there another couple months, I would have been laid off anyway. They didn't survive the recession. Story 30. In college, I was working at Domino's. Worked there throughout, so like 3 years. Was using a pair of black pants during that time that apparently wasn't Domino approved. A new regional lady came into power and hated me. During a Valentine's Day evening rush, she comes into the store and asked if my GM talked to me about my pants yet. I said no, and kept working. She then slips out the back. The next day I come in to open the store up. She's there and gives me a write-up for not having the right pants. Been using those pants for years already. I flip the paper over and write, "This is my 2 weeks notice." She says that I still need to have the correct pants for the next 2 weeks. I said nah and walked out, quitting without the notice. Story 31. Asked for 80,000. They said no and maybe try again. After I get a cert, found out the people I was training with no prior experience, or cert, were making 85,000, threatened to leave. They got me to 78,000, seriously. And so I left anyways. I was the only one with a math degree and experience out of the group too. Now I make 92,000 with a 15% bonus. Story 32. When I was an undergrad, I applied for a job working in the meat department of a Ralph's, think generic grocery store brand, owned by Kroger. On the application and during the interview, the boss confirmed I could lift at least 35 to 40 pounds myself. I said I could and confirmed that was the limit of items I'd be working with. Probably my 6th day working there. I get asked to help move some bins with chicken around in the back room. Okay, by me, seems like a very meat department type of work to me. These bins of chicken weighed at least 90 to 120 pounds each, and they wanted me to lift them by hand and move them 10 to 15 feet around the room and stack them up by date. And they were all out of order date-wise. I asked my manager who would help me due to how heavy the chicken was, and they told me they expected me to do it alone. I looked at my manager, thanked her for the opportunity, and gave her my ID badge and walked out the front door. The look of disbelief on her face was the funniest thing I've ever seen. The temerity to act like I'm willing to throw out my back for a $13 per hour job was so audacious, I thought she was joking at first. Had a new job the next day from a previous boss I had worked for, making considerably more money. Story 33. My boss changed my start time from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m. I dropped a no-notice resignation on his desk as I walked out with my stuff. 6 weeks later, I landed a great job at a powerful and ethical institution. Still there 8 years later. Story 34. When I was younger, I was desperate to get a job in the animal field because I wanted to get experience since no one would hire me. I tried vet hospital, kennels, and volunteering. No one was interested. I found a pet sanctuary that finally called me back, or was somewhat interested. They said they would call me back, and if they don't reach out to me, to call them. Me, being a spry youth, was really interested in this position. When I called after many attempts to get an interview, it finally happened. I show up to a farm/house with a kennel in the back with even more kennels in the back. I drive up a dirt path and meet an older lady. It's just her as far as I can see. She sits me down and we have an interview. Her first statement to me was, "You are young. Most young people quit on me or ghost me." I, being naive, said, "I won't. I need experience. I want to become a vet and no one would hire me." She said, "Okay, regular interview happens." She talks about how her workers are helping her in the back now currently with said dog. I did not take a tour of the place, I just accepted the job. I show up bright and early the next week since I am working 2 jobs. Now I fit the animal job with my other job. I would work 5 to 11, go to my other job 11 to 7. My other job didn't care that I was late. I have been there for years. They understood. Would work at the pet sanctuary on my days off from 5 to 1, come back 2 to 9. It was miserable, but I loved the animals that were there. She bred and rescued roadies. I fell in love with the dogs, but not the owner. No one else was ever there, just me, but she would talk about other workers, but I'd never see them. Came in on a Saturday where the owner did adoption days, and I finally see other people, but I'm the only one cleaning, picking up poop, rotating dogs, etc. No one ever helped me with what I was doing. I would have everything to the best of my ability at the end of the night, and I would come back the next shift and it would still be the same. I was having doubts until finally someone else was hired. Guy was the same age as me, but I was stuck with the grunt work. He seemed to be doing the easier tasks. He was confused, and so was I about why I was being put to the tasks and not him. One day I was there all day, and as the shift was ending, my coworker just needed to clean dog bowls. So I said, cool, I'm call her and ask her if everything is good. Can I leave? She questions my reason as to why I don't do the dishes. Me, confused, ask, why can't my coworker? I've been here all day and she says so. Coworker is confused as to why she didn't let me leave. It only gets worse. I could go on and on about how I was emotionally manipulated, but I stayed because the dogs and me needing experience. So to your question, what was the duck this I quit? I was cleaning kennels on the far side of the building, just me with 20 plus kennels with Rotties who would smear their poop and wouldn't have outside space because I didn't have time to do everything. She comes back and yells and berates me to my face about the tasks not being done fast enough, when it was filthy for a good 3 minutes about how stupid I was and incompetent. I held in my feelings to finish the work. Go home and tell me, wife, it's not worth it. The stress from the job has made me lose weight. I was afraid to be late, so I slept early even on holidays. I left my family events early because I was afraid to get berated. I couldn't sleep that day. I was tachycardic. My heart was pounding from the fear of confronting this person. I couldn't sleep. I went to work that day and my boss can tell something was off. I was quiet and basically in a shell because of how scared I was. I couldn't do it to her face, so I wrote her a note before I left, told my coworker I'm done, I can't do this. And he said, I don't know how you stayed here for this long. I don't know why she was so hard on you. Note said, I'm done, send me my last check in the mail, and left. Went to my other job with a weight lifted off my shoulder, but as I'm walking into my job, she calls me. I don't answer. I let it go to voicemail. There is no way she would have seen my note. She left for an event, and she wouldn't be back for hours. I planned for this. She calls again and again, leaving voicemail after voicemail about not leaving. She would raise my wage to 20 an hour, and that we can talk about the future of me there. I was being emotionally manipulating to come back, so I blocked her from calling me. TLDR. Emotionally manipulated, but too young and naive to figure it out till I couldn't handle it anymore. Story 35. Back in high school, I worked at a place that prepared different types of mailing for companies. We'd prep tabbed pieces of mail, stuff envelopes, etc. It was sort of a chill job and paid somewhat well for a high school kid. Anyway, one Saturday they had me come in, and instead of my normal job, my manager told me I was going to be doing drywall work. They were trying to get the unit next door ready to move into. Told them I knew nothing about drywall, but they didn't care. So I did about 3 hours of work, struggling real bad, trying to tape/float joints. Finally had enough and told them I was going to take my lunch break. Got in my car and left and never went back. Story 36. My first sales job out of college sucked hard. It did help get me into supply chain though. I found a new role that fit with where I wanted to go. Quit the day after I signed my new offer and never looked back. The feeling telling my coworkers and boss's boss, my line manager was out of office, was incredible. I was free and finally on a path I wanted to be on. 8 years later, I'm making over 3 times what I made at that crafty place. Story 37. I finally had enough of my last job, except my mindset wasn't duck this, I quit. My mindset was duck this, I'm making these chumps fire me so I can collect unemployment. I also took a month-long vacation because I had that much vacation saved up before I made them fire me. I was there for 7 years, took them 2 weeks to fire me. I could have cashed out my vacation time instead of taking a month-long vacation, but from what I remember, I would have been taxed higher if they had cashed me out. It was glorious taking a month off and then coming back only to make them fire me. They knew what I was doing. Story 38. I did help desk work over a decade ago and had already given 2 weeks notice. On the actual last day, I just didn't want to work there anymore. So at the start of my shift, gave the manager the bird and walked off, leaving my badge up front at security in story 39. Secure the new job, get a start date, and once you know, just say, about that raise, since it's not happening, I'm no longer working here. And just leave. Story 40. I was teaching at the time and had just relocated quite a significant distance away. I'd been getting up at about 5:30 a.m., setting off driving at 6 a.m., and driving for 2 hours through winter in a freezing cold car in the northern hemisphere. It was grueling and I did it for about 4 months. Anyway, one Friday afternoon I had a particularly bad observation of a lesson. I was tired, in an inner city school and just didn't give a duck anymore. I was walking out that afternoon to my car with a box full of books to mark over the weekend, and it dawned on me, what the duck am I doing? Made my mind up then I wouldn't be going back, and I didn't. One of the best decisions I ever made. The books went in the bin. Story 41. Was hired remotely. Pressed them during the interview repeatedly that remote work wouldn't change, as I wanted to stay at the company long-term but would not relocate. 3 years later, after my work had saved them millions, they paused the processing of my promotion after awarding verbally to say my new role would be based in their Crab Hole HQ. Within 48 hours, I had secured a long-term contract at a massive name brand company. Told my boss, "You pay me to be well-networked as a thought leader within the industry. Don't forget how fast top talent can walk." That was a please 2 weeks notice. Story 42. I quit my last job because my supervisor was horrible. Extremely micromanaging, rude, not a nice person. I was going to quit the day of, but somehow my director found out and texted me about it while I was using up the rest of my sick pay. Since the company doesn't pay out sick pay and I had 4 days left, I told him, yes, I'm quitting. Tuesday is my last day. Luckily got a new job that Friday, and I'm much happier. Story 43. Worked at a factory 15-ish years ago. Had an old lady supervisor that liked to ride people. One day she decided to give me a 15-minute lecture about responsibility and timeliness. I was like 5 minutes late. Responded with, "I might be young, stupid, and irresponsibly, but I'm working on it. But you know you can't fix old dumb Karen," and walked out. This is the only time in my entire life I have called a woman a Karen. Story 44. Had a job as a supervisor in a nursing home kitchen. I was the young guy, so I always volunteered to work holidays because I didn't have kids. We got a new manager in that I absolutely hated. I hung on for a few months and volunteered to work Christmas Day. I no-showed knowing that he'd get the call and be pulled away from his family to go cover. Duck you, Craig. Story 45. Employer was constantly withholding paychecks. I'd be lucky to get one a month, effectively making less than minimum wage. So I always had to work a second job. Came in to pick up a check after working my second job and found out they had left for vacation without handing out paychecks. I walked out and never went back. Story 46. Right out of college, I had a job where I was basically cold calling people to sell their oil and gas minerals. All of it unsolicited, and it was such a dumb job. There were a bunch of us in little dark offices. If we didn't call like 150 people a day, you were kind of pushed into a dark corner. They ran it like boiler room. Cut people's ties off if you got your first transaction. Why we wore ties made no sense either. They promised lucrative bonuses and gave away a Rolex. They also played favorites a lot and would steal bigger deals and give them to their inner circle of performers. It was toxic, very Andy Elliott type atmosphere. One day, the pit boss comes in and sits in my office on a Friday afternoon. Laid some crap on me about how the people aren't performing up to their standards are about to start being let go. He said something along the lines of, "The guys that are on the chopping block and want to be here are coming in tomorrow, Saturday, for an unpaid day of calling." He highly suggested I'd be there and that if I didn't close a deal ASAP, I'd be let go on Monday morning. That Friday afternoon, I just left my little key card on the desk and walked out and didn't come back. Told the one guy there I actually liked I was quitting and bounced. Oddly enough, I got like 3 phone calls from bosses, including the pit boss, being like, "Bro, why did you quit? We really liked you and thought you had so much potential." It sucked. Story 47. Not me, but I worked the 3rd shift and I knew another guy that was working on his own stuff on the side. None of my business, and I didn't ask questions or say anything. He always did his work well, and I don't care about anything else. He finally got fed up and he printed out a bunch of flyers and put them on every desk in our 4-story office. Probably around 1,000 people in office daily. I saw him putting them out, but not my job to ask him what he was doing. Just let him do it. The next day, management was scrambling trying to pick up the flyers. I got a good look at the flyers, and it was an advertisement for his new business he was building, investment advisor type job. And on the back of the flyer was how much he hated this job. Story 48. Back in the day, I ended up in some kind of assistant role to 3 guys who all thought I was their full-time secretary, plus taking care of needy clients and some, "Can you cover for XYZ while they're out?" All for minimum wage and accompanied by constant whining. When it was time to renew the contract, they indicated they would like to keep me, offered a minor raise, and I replied that I'd prefer to go stand on a street corner because there I'd at least could choose and not have to satisfy 3 guys at once all the damn time. The big boss, who was not one of the 3, looked at me like I grew a second head or something. Fun times. Story 49. Got a job at Wendy's when I was a teen. When I arrived for my first day, I showed up 15 minutes early. Was told to go wait until my start time in the lounge. I went and came back in at 1 minute past my start time. She told me I was late. They stuck me on the grill. I waited until the peak dinner rush and just rolled out. F that manager. Other job as a dishwasher for a seafood place. They were understaffed as it was, but a couple of my buddies worked there. Got fired that day for stealing food, and they were the only help I had. Again, waited for the peak of dinner rush and just left. Story 50. Was working fast food while in college, got a job in my industry, but knew that if I told my boss my hours would be cut, so I just didn't tell her. Told no one until the shift I quit on. Walked in, told the manager working, "Sorry man, I quit," and walked back out. Heard later that the boss had said, well, if he'd have told me I'd have given his hours to someone else, just validated that not telling her was the right decision. Story 51. Forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve the peace. Don't burn bridges, you just never know. So do the right thing and put it in your 2 weeks and hang out. Good, now that is out the way. Bring in a mariachi on Conic de Mayo, perfect excuse as to why there's a mariachi in the first place. And them sing out loud that you quit and walk out in a sombrero hat and a pre-packaged margarita. Mic drop. Story 52. Was told by new company I would have an offer by the end of the week. It's been a month-and-a-half long process, and every little annoying thing at work is making me want to up and leave. Story 53. Had 3 days of training at one place. Our mission was to help people with emergency relief grants. They sat me away from the rest of the team. Colleagues wouldn't respond. One day I said, "Duck this, I'm out here," left mid-shift. Story 54. My partner and provider of 17 years died, so I was desperate for any job, and no one was hiring me. Finally, I found this dude who was looking for random people on Craigslist to be a direct support professional for his young adult, nonverbal, autistic daughter. He met me for a half hour and was like, "Okay, why don't we have a trial day and see how it goes?" I literally was asking him things on our way out the door, like, how do I know if she needs to use the restroom? Does she have a sign for food? How will I know what she wants to eat? Anyway, we had a successful first day and he hired me for $20 an hour, even though the position was supposed to be independent contractor work. I'd still like to go after him for misclassification, actually. This poor woman would be out of the house 10 hours a day with the other DSPs and me, as we spent time with her in consecutive shifts. Her dad was this self-important CEO who worked out of his home and would be on his AirPods all day, blathering like he was a big shot, even though he was opening random credit cards to keep business afloat. My client started to act out and get agitated because she just wanted to be at home, like anyone would. But her dad would be like, "Okay, well, she can work on things here." He always wanted us DSPs to be drilling her on vocabulary, trying to get her to talk, teaching her social skills, etc. But we weren't language specialists or speech therapists or even experienced. We were just Craigslist randoms who didn't mind taking someone out for fun and learning experiences. Plus, she just wanted to chill, like lay in bed and watch a movie. As her days out got worse because she was melting down more and more, I started comparing notes with the other DSPs about whether or not their paychecks were late. None of us ever got paid on time, and while the dad had a third party that managed our payroll, when we would complain, he would just say, "I'm sure they're coming. I'll talk to them." And then he wouldn't have anything to report back or would say, "Oh, I'll talk to them today," when I'd ask what they said. Furthermore, when we compared notes, I discovered that I was being paid several dollars less per hour than the other two. That pissed one of them off, and she was like, "That's so unfair. I see the work you do. You should be getting paid the same as us." She told me that if I quit, she would quit in solidarity because duck that guy. Later that same week, I received a life insurance check for my partner's death. The next day, my client randomly attacked me in a JCPenney, and I needed help from a stranger to even get her off me. I was done. When I dropped her off with the next DSP, I told her I was quitting today. My paycheck was 2 months late at that point, but they always came eventually and no one else would hire me. And I wasn't going to keep getting assaulted for free. The other DSP and I composed a group text telling the dad, who was out of town as a speaker at a big tech conference, that while we cared about his daughter, this was a job and we took it to get paid, which wasn't consistently happening, so we were going to look for other employment. He got mad and said this wasn't how we should be handling things. He asked if we were really doing this and leaving the client with no help, even though we left her in the care of her adult brother. The next morning, he texted me and said, "You're coming to help with client, right?" I left him on read and haven't seen either of them since. There were only 3 of us, so I took 2/3 of the team with me when I quit. My missing paychecks came that same week. I hope his business goes under. Mother ducker. Story 55, backstory required. I worked in a biosecure facility, shower in, shower out, work clothing provided on the clean side of the shower. I had been with the company about 3 years, and my job skills are very niche and hard to acquire, so I was paid well because replacing me would be very difficult. The employer called me in for a meeting. HR, my manager, and their manager were all there. I knew this was about to suck. After an hour of them talking, they wrote me up for not wearing the communal underwear that the employer provides. I had chosen to go commando for 3 years rather than fish through a large bucket of random underwear to find something to wear. They said that they had been monitoring underwear use, dirty versus number of people, and had determined that I was not wearing any. I explained why and asked what difference it made and where in the handbook it stated I needed to wear them. I decided I didn't feel like fighting this battle quite quickly, so I signed the paper for the PIP, Personnel Improvement Plan, and left the building. Sat in my car, made 2 phone calls, one to a good friend in the industry and one to my employer's competition. Then I drove to the office of the competition, 15 minutes away, and signed an employment contract with them for a 30% raise, no weekend work, and a better benefits package. Original employer called me the next day asking why I didn't come into work, and I told them it was because I quit. That one write-up was the straw that broke the camel's back because I had been overworked by them for the entire 3 years I was with them. I only stayed because the plague hit and it was a stable job. It's been almost 3 years and they still haven't been able to replace me, and I see postings for my former job with them constantly posted. I brought 3 of their best workers with me to the competition over the last 2 years. We get treated like gold by the new employer. I never realized how bad the last job was until I worked for a company that actually respects their employees. Story 56. I took some crappy job doing tech support for MCY. This is how long ago it was. It sucked. Horrible coworkers, bosses, schedule. The only good thing was the pay. A third-party company called Teletech was hiring people to do help desk work for UPS facility. It was less pay, but much better hours and schedule. I applied and got the job. They said started end of the month, about 3 weeks. I went to work later that afternoon at MCI. Every day before we got on the phones, we had a stupid rah-rah meeting. This day, the supervisor, he looked like the black guy that got shot in the face in Pulp Fiction, was going over a kudos a coworker got. Everyone was clapping. I didn't give a crap. After the meeting, he pulls me aside and lectures me like a 5-year-old about supporting your coworkers. They're like family or some crap. I walked back to my phone, logged off, and walked out. He called my house about 2 hours later, and I just hung up on him. Also, a cotton mill in SC back in 2002. They lied about what job I'd be doing, then stuck me with a Vietnamese guy that didn't speak English to train me. It was a 12-hour shift, and at about the 7-hour mark, I nearly lost my hand because of the language issue. I said, "Duck this," and went to walk out the door. Surprise, they lock in their employees. I went to the receptionist and told her to unlock the entrance near her office. She refused. I walked over to the public desk phone in the hallway and told her I was going to call 911 if she didn't. She got a supervisor, and they let me out with some curt words. Then, they tried to not pay me for the 7 hours. Duck you, Avondale. Story 57. Worked for a Chipotle years ago. Work was overbearing, and the pay did not merit it. Went out for a smoke, and my feet just kept on walking me home. Got home, took off my uniform, and tossed it in the trash. Never went back to collect my final paycheck. Moved like 4 hours away 3 weeks later. Still haven't received anything in the mail. At this point, it doesn't matter. I sometimes wonder if my boss thought I was just taking a few minutes longer. Story 58. I was chilling in my room playing COD on Xbox Live with a friend. It got a little later, around 8 p.m., and I said, "Duck, I don't want to work tomorrow, and I don't want to get off soon." So then I said, "I'll be back in like 30 minutes. Drove to the shop, dropped off my uniform, a note, time card, and the keys. We're good to play all night. I just quit. Story 59. My last job, I worked as a social media manager and video editor for a TV broadcast company. I was there for about 4 years, but over time, more tasks got put on my plate, most of which were way beyond what I was initially hired to do. It was a small company where I ended up being a jack of all trades, master of none type of person. During my last one-to-one with the owner / my boss, I was given a raise from $40,000 to 42,000 Canadian dollars. I was already upset with my current pay, as it was already under what I should be making, around the 50,000 range. But taking in the amount of responsibilities I took over in the last year, and just the direction my career was going, I got fed up and started looking elsewhere. Fast forward to February, I got an offer with a salary way higher than what I was expecting, and with benefits. Sent my boss my resignation the next day, giving him a 1-week notice. Kept things pretty tight-lipped around my coworkers as to where I was going. Story 60. I had a horrible owner of a restaurant, and I was GM. It was a new restaurant, trying to be way too high-end for the area. I had lots of restaurant experience and management experience, as my last spot was family-owned, and let me run what I wanted because I was trusted. Long story short, he couldn't pay the bills and belittled everyone. Would buy crazy expensive booze and wine that no one would buy. Would interrupt all my trainings with staff to discredit me, even though his only restaurant experience was owning Wendy's that went out of business. I'd always be talking and arguing in the office with him. He wanted me on the floor 24/7, but somehow expected me to also get the office work completed, and on the one days we were off, he'd make me come in and clean and organize inventory because our bar manager ended up cleaning. I was chatting at the bar with guests as he asked me to. He said he wanted guests to always see me and know a manager was present to assist, even if our floor manager was there. These guests specifically at the bar were regulars with money, lobbyists, and state senators, and assemblymen located across from the Capitol. I received a text from the owner that women should be seen and not heard as I'm doing my freaking job. Little did he know that month, I'd been talking with our health insurance company, because when I went to make my son a doctor appointment, I was told I didn't have health insurance, which we contributed 50% to, even though we were promised in our handbooks and contracts it would be 80% paid by the employer. When he texted me that, I calmly worked my shift, then messaged him in HR what he had said and told them I would never be returning. Only time I never gave notice. My old employer found out I quit and called me that week asking me to come back to GM his spot. Story 61. I worked at a small retail store in college. The company was doing terrible. Sales were down, and we had stopped getting shipments of new products. The store looked awful. The shelves were barely filled, but we did the best we could to stage things and make it look less awful. I had been promoted to a shift manager, so myself and my store manager spent several days prepping for a visit from our district manager. Keep in mind, I'm like 20 years old, a full-time student, and worked the closing shift a few times a week, maybe 20 hours. So district manager shows up, rips me and our store manager over how bad the product looked. We tried to explain we hadn't gotten a shipment of new product in weeks and kept asking when we would get new items. He deflected and put the blame back on us, as if we could sell dust-covered calendars and jewelry to get us back in the green. I went to the office to clock out for lunch and cried. Then it hit me. I'm a college kid making $7.25 an hour. I was not going to get yelled at for the rest of my shift for stuff that had nothing to do with me. I clocked out for lunch and put a post-it note on the computer saying, I quit, went to lunch and never came back. About an hour later, my manager and district manager noticed I hadn't come back yet, so they called a few times. Then must have seen the post-it and then called again to berate me over voicemail about how unprofessional this was, blah, blah. Never called them back. It was the best feeling in the world for the rest of that day. Story 62. When I was 17, I used to do room service at a Holiday Inn, but I got a job at a seed factory that paid better. One day I ran into the hotel restaurant manager, and while we were talking, she asked me if I could wash dishes 2 nights a week. And I said sure. So on the first night I was doing it, the guy on the early shift didn't take his trash out, and restaurant trash is friggin' heavy as hell. So I had to take his trash out. But at the end of the night, I left my trash for him. The manager for the kitchen left a note for me to call him. I had never met the guy. When I called him, he asked me why I left the trash, and I told him that I took the other guys out so he can take mine. This dude got so pissed that he started saying, well, buddy, if that's how you're gonna be, I don't need that kind of crap, so we're gonna have to let you go. And I stopped and thought about it a sec, and I said, okay, that's fine, I don't understand. I didn't need this job. But did you talk to the restaurant manager because she begged me to do this? And he jumped back over me saying, nah, man, I don't need that crap. I don't need to talk to anyone. So I said, okay, but I don't understand. And he says, what don't you understand? And I replied, well, you just fired me, so I don't understand who's going to wash your dishes tonight because I'm the only one here. And all of a sudden his demeanor changed and he was like, well, you can work tonight and tomorrow we can discuss it. And I just said, nah, I'd rather be fired. And I went home with a smile. Story 63. I was a waiter for a year when I was 22. I had tickets to a concert on New Year's Eve and told them in like August, got the time off, no problem. As it got closer, I couldn't make the concert, so I decided to be a nice guy and call my job and said, I'm available New Year's Eve, but can only work until 10 p.m. since I still wanted to go out a bit. The assistant manager was pumped and I went into work. 10 p.m. rolls around and I went to say bye to him and he goes, what are you talking about? It's New Year's Eve, you can't leave. And I went, well, I wasn't supposed to be here anyway. I thought the 5 hours I helped was pretty generous when I had off originally. And he goes, that's great, but you're here now and working until everything's cleaned and closed, and walked away from me. I tried once more to tell him, but he pretty much yelled that I had to stay and I went, okay, walked out the back door and drove home. He called me 30 minutes later asking where I was, and I just told him, I'm out with friends, Happy New Year. And he hung up. Heard a few days later, the owner and him were screaming at each other because I wasn't supposed to get fired/quit, but I took that decision out of their hands. Duck Ryan. Story 64. I resigned just before the end of the financial year, let's say about 2 to 3 days, used up all my leave and never took advantage with leave, unlike many of the staff. Manager spitefully calculates my remaining leave just before new leave period starts. She knew I was being bullied at work and had planned with mom to go on holiday to get over the bullying and knew my mom was worried about me. I cried in front of the manager as I was so upset. So I get this email saying I've got 36 hours of leave remaining for 8 weeks notice period. Consequentially, having been informed about all of the terrible details of the things happening to me at work by staff, I knew that I would need to go off sick from stress at work and hoped they'd be logical in approach with this. Paid either way. The manager emailed the next morning and said, if you need to go off sick, do it in February, not January, your last working month. I would say that karma definitely occurred when I was signed off on the Friday and handed in the sick note, checked the policy, and logged off. Also revealed their incompetence because I had not been called once during my sick leave. Story 65. Not a job, but a gig through my work, was shooting a baseball tournament with this guy who was a scumbag, and we tried to warn our boss, but he wouldn't listen. The guy's truck and equipment was a disaster. The whole tournament was constant stress, and replacing parts with the truck going down right before the championship. The next day, we broke equipment down, but Scumbag was on his phone the whole time with his lawyer not helping. Eventually, we were waiting around for an hour to get the equipment inspected to be loaded before I told him to get off the phone. He blew up at me. I started shouting back. And eventually, I told him to go duck himself and told the guy I drove up with that we were out of there. Apparently, the rest of the crew also left after watching it, so he had to load everything himself. He had the contract one more year, but we wouldn't work with him. And word is, 2.5 years later, he hasn't paid most of the crew. After that, we got the contract directly and film it ourselves with a lot less stress. Story 66. I was offered a fantastic position, but I was fired after 10 months. Now I'm job hunting, and many of the people I'm hiring know my former manager or colleague. I never felt upset. I wrote a very polite application with illustrations and a kind message on LinkedIn expressing gratitude for the things I enjoyed. For example, working with clients, the wonderful people I learned from, etc. If you get the job, it's best to say goodbye in the most positive way possible. That way, if something goes wrong, you'll still have a good reputation in your field. After I left the country, I just feel sorry for the people because they weren't necessarily bad people, they just found themselves in a toxic work environment.